Welcome to Innovation in Government, presented by Carahsoft. This program's from TechNet Cyber 2025. AFCEA International produces TechNet Cyber every year at the Baltimore Convention Center. I'm your host, Francis Rose. 3 solutions exist now for implementing the Zero Trust cybersecurity framework across the Department of Defense. That framework's the guiding principle for DoD Cyber today. Over the next hour, you'll meet leaders from the Navy, Marine Corps, the Joint Staff, and the Defense Information Systems Agency, along with industry leaders that are supporting the Pentagon's cyber community. First, an industry view of how the department got so far so fast on Zero Trust. Alex Whitworth, Director of Sales at Carahsoft. Alex, welcome. The main takeaway, of course, from TechNet Cyber was the Zero Trust announcement from Randy Resnick. When he was on the program, he said a lot of people never thought they would get there. Now they're on track to really nail that 2027 deadline, according to him. What has happened? What have they done over the last period of time to get where they are today on Zero Trust?
That's a great question. And I'm gonna key in on the cyber workforce development elements that they have focused on to help them achieve some of these goals. Really understanding the human capital element of cybersecurity, right? What skills does the department have, and what skills do they need to build or develop internally or recruit for externally, right? So the ability to, or sort of the goal of unlocking the automation capabilities and AI capabilities and next generation threat defense capabilities in a lot of these security tools that are available on the market really requires the right level of expertise and right people in the seat to be able to deliver those results. And so really getting the arms around what those work roles are, whether it's network ops or compliance or software development or cyber threat analysts, right? And then what skills are already exist within the staff and what skills need to be brought in and retained ultimately has been a huge focus, especially with the DoD's cyber workforce development 8140 framework. So that's been a key for their sort of making more progress in that area.
It's interesting that you focus on that because the workforce issue, not just for the cyber workforce, but how the whole rest of the workforce thinks of themselves as cyber professionals is something that DoD leaders have keyed on with me a couple of different times over the years.
Oh, absolutely. And there's, the interesting thing that we're seeing in the market is the increase of available platforms and providers that are delivering capabilities to help agencies get their arms around their cyber workforce. So whether it's instructor-led training, sort of a traditional model, or gamified platforms that help cyber defenders think like hackers so that they can better defend their network, to full virtual cyber range platforms that help develop a simulation where they can test their stack of cyber tools and capabilities against a real world, live fire exercise.
I was going to mention gamification because I keep hearing about that from the vendor side, not as much from the government side, but I keep hearing about that more and more and more. What's driving that in your view?
I think a little bit is the culture, right? Building a training model that is fun and exciting and engaging for folks, but also forces them to be put into a situation where they have to test their skills against something that's unexpected, right? So that gamified piece of it.
So either specifically regarding the workforce, or more broadly thinking about Zero Trust as a whole, what are the pieces that you will pay the most attention to over the next year and a half as DoD continues to move on this journey?
It's a really good question. And, when you think about Zero Trust, it was purposely built as a framework or an architecture that was flexible to allow agencies to leverage the investments they've already made in tools and technology and people, and tune those capabilities and integrate them to deliver, Zero Trust data protection or identity or network protection or sort of traffic flow protection. And so we're seeing so much progress. I think what we're looking forward to seeing more of is truly leveraging zero trust and multi-cloud environments, and then also leveraging AI to automate as much as possible.
Quick, about 30 seconds left. You mentioned artificial intelligence. How important is that, both from securing the AI tools and using AI to secure the entire network? How important is that, in your view, to a zero trust effort?
Super important. I think it's going to be gaining importance over time, especially as more of these AI projects turn into production projects, and as the broader market matures and more applications are available for threat defenders to leverage those capabilities. So we're really excited about the future and what it brings, for our federal customers.
Alex Whitworth, great to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Steve Wallace, Chief Technology Officer at DISA, welcome. It's good to see you again. What are the technologies that you're paying attention to now that will manifest themselves 3-5 years out? What are you looking over the horizon at right now, Steve?
So first, thanks for having me. There's a number of them, right? Everyone's, for the last several years, been quite excited about AI, but a lot of it's been, what's the practical application of AI, not simply sprinkling it about and saying you're using it for everything, but what's sort of the practical application? I mean, the workforce is changing. How can we leverage some of these capabilities, whether it be generative or that type of thing, in order to help augment the workforce and make the workforce stronger? There's other places where things like NDR, network detect and respond. We did EDR, the endpoint detect and respond, years ago. Well, now we're seeing those capabilities sort of evolve in the in the network side of things, and basically help the analysts to diagnose attacks, remediate, and have a number of integrations. So again, that force multiplier, and a lot of those use AI of some measure, but they, there's very specific point cases where we're looking at it now. Another one within the next few years, we're finally seeing quantum resistant cryptography get a foothold. And so really excited to see that happening. And as that starts to roll in, we're already seeing vendors integrated into their products. So that's another place that I think over the next few years, we're going to see a massive push towards quantum deploying algorithms that are quantum resistant across the entire enterprise.
The quantum discussion is fascinating to me because maybe even at this show last year, but in the not too distant past, the discussion was, well, quantum's coming, but it's kind of way out there. And now people are talking about quantum like it's either right around the corner or will be here any second now. Is that a fair read on my part?
It is, and you've seen a number of breakthroughs. You've seen a number of companies announce new ways of doing quantum chips, new quantum chips, evolutions, additional qubits. It's really been for them about getting to as many error-free qubits as possible, and they seem to be making strides in that space. I mean, the thing to bear in mind is that the quantum compute is good for particular use cases. It's not going to replace classic compute across the board, but it's something to pair up with classic compute to really change the game. Things like material science, medicine, that sort of thing. But for us, most importantly, the side of cryptography that we've all thought is reasonably safe for the foreseen future. The quantum machines will potentially be able to pop in seconds versus years that the most powerful traditional computers would take. So it does seem to finally coming to bear. And the biggest thing with it is there's no defined point on the calendar where, yep, we're gonna, by this date we are going to hit the ability to crack encryption, which means that we need to double our efforts now to be ready for when that day happens.
Yeah. You said that quantum is not for every application. How do you evaluate or determine what quantum is good for and what it's not necessary for? Or is it self-evident because of the nature of the application?
A lot of it, frankly, has been through reading, talking to some of the quantum scientists. It's still something that's pretty well niche. So we don't think that we'll have a quantum computer in a DISA data center anytime soon. But we are talking to a number of the cloud providers who have integrations today commercially about how can we bring it to vehicles like JWCC and integrate it across capabilities that we already have, because there are a number of use cases that we could see the services and the DAFAs, et cetera, with needs. Organizations like DARPA, they will likely have need for quantum. I know they're already working in that space, but how do we commoditize it and make it more readily available to the department?
When we were here last year, you and I talked about modernization. What is the modernization journey like at DISA, given that we're now talking about things that a year ago, like I said, nobody was talking about quantum as being right around the corner. Nobody was talking about generative AI being a huge component of daily use in any organization in the department. Nobody even probably knew the term agentic AI at that point. So what does a modernization journey look like in an organization where these things are coming, seeming like out of the woodwork?
They are, and that's where we rely heavily on our vendors, our partners, those sorts of things that are coming to us constantly with the latest and greatest. This is what's going on here. This is what's happening here. It really becomes more about us to evaluate what's real, what's potentially maybe overinflated, and then how does it actually apply to our mission? And it is increasing rapidly day by day. We're seeing new and interesting things along the way, new uses. And what's really interesting is to talk to the folks in the workforce, their particular roles, the ones that are super motivated to bring new technologies in. How are they leveraging the new technologies? Maybe not even at home, or maybe not even at work, maybe at home. How are they using it at home? One of our folks, she was explaining to me the way that she and her daughter have used generative AI in a number of ways. And it's ways that wouldn't have occurred to me otherwise. But it's how are we empowering the workforce to take advantage of these tools and using the great ideas that they bring to the table with it.
Quick final thought, about 30 seconds left. How big an issue is interoperability when you talk about all of these things that are coming online, or maybe things that you don't know about that will be coming online between now and the next time we get together?
Interoperability is huge, and it is a significant problem. APIs are there, and APIs are always useful and are a good way to start to sew systems together. But a lot of times the interoperability at the platform layer is driving a lot of challenges for us across the department. We are not one singular IT enterprise. There's many different vendors in similar spaces across the department. So how do we get them to work together, work with the standards bodies to come up with the standards for interoperability? But interoperability is key to allowing us to move forward and getting the best outcome for the user.
Steve, it's great to have you here again. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
James Hansen's Acceleration Team Manager for Adobe. Welcome. It's great to see you. What's the connection, in your view, between the technology modernization that the Defense Department's undertaking and a couple of the priorities of the new leadership at DoD, modernizing acquisition and modernizing the warfighting process to moving to this warrior ethos concept?
Yeah, I think what's critical is some of the extension. The warrior ethos is all about building trust, right? And peace through strength, as the DepSec has articulated. And I think, the war initiative is a primary area where ultimately one of the focuses is digital first operations. Digital first operations is the modernization, elimination of manual workflows, paper processes, outdated IT systems and platforms, using AI and automation to drive that mission efficiency, that mission effectiveness, and technology is at the core of being able to do that. A lot of the DepSec priorities align with what the administration is doing in terms of eliminating costs through duplicative software and capabilities. Again, leveraging automation, AI to achieve efficiencies, cost savings, modernization of legacy systems with the adoption of secure cloud tools. All of those, the technology is going to be the enabler of enabling the DoD to have a fighting force, a leaner fighting force, to achieve those priorities. So I think it's at the root of it.
Mm-hmm. Before we started recording, you and I talked a little bit about the idea that I'm not sure if anybody said warrior ethos, how do you get to a more lethal force that people would think about software fast track, something like that, or that somebody would necessarily think of the things that the department is talking about reforming acquisition and in particular software acquisition. But here we are, and those things seem to be very important to where the department wants to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of rebuilding the military, matching those capabilities of a leaner fighting force to the threats that are happening today, we can't have a bloated budget, DoD budget, right? And so streamlining that to ensure that there's, one price for all, that ultimately each of the services are able to acquire technology and emerging technology capabilities at a cost that they can afford it today, requires what we have been doing with DISA for the last decade, which is essentially a common contract vehicle that leverages the buying power of 1.6 million DoD users across civilian and active duty to streamline that process, have a centralized contract management organization, and that enables the DoD and the services to deploy those emerging technologies faster versus, month-long procurement processes that, legacy processes that we have today. So I think it's all aligned in terms of cost cutting, efficiencies, streamlining acquisition to get the best capability in the hands of the warfighters faster is at the tip of the spear, really, around what the DevSec priorities are for those.
Yeah, and when you talk about, I think the word there that is the most important to the uniform leaders that I talk to, not just here, but all over the place, is speed. They want to get whatever they know they need into the hands of the warfighter, as you just described, as quickly as they possibly can. And it strikes me that's where this acquisition focus has the potential to be the most helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
When you focus on all of these things at once, is there a direction that you've seen organizations who are able to incorporate them all successfully take in order to get to that end state that you've described as quickly as they possibly can?
Yeah, today we're working with the DoD to deliver a next generation content platform for all public facing websites in the DoD, which ultimately is where the public goes, where warfighters go, where the global defense community goes, allied partners, in terms of getting a single source of truth for what the DepSec and the administration's message is out into the market, right? And so they have leveraged the JELA contract vehicle as a vehicle to acquire that capability into the hands of the department and the public affairs mission officers. In lightning speed. They right now are transforming off their legacy platform onto this next generation platform, and we've been able to get them from a pilot AOA to evaluation to deployment in 6 to 8 months, which, traditionally this is something that might have taken, 2 years. So I think it all aligns. The ability to have a vehicle where ultimately there's one price per service, everybody's buying from the same vehicle, it's centralized through DISA and DITCO, gets the capability in the hands of those mission owners faster to then deploy the capability. So I think it's all connected.
James, it's great to talk to you again. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Francis. Appreciate you.
Dave Volker, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. Where are you? What are the priorities in the Zero Trust framework for you right now? Which of the pieces of it are the most important to you right now?
So for me, the most important are two: microsegmentation and user and entity behavioral analytics. But in saying that, I'm really trying to build partnerships between cybersecurity service providers, our ICAM service providers, and the programs themselves. So my understanding is that our programs have expertise on the capabilities they've been providing to warfighter for decades. And really what I want to do is combine that expertise with their knowledge to implement microsegmentation where it needs to go, identify the things we want to protect, talk to our cybersecurity service providers, let them know where those things are so we can implement visibility analytics, automation orchestration that help with that user and entity behavioral analytics. But a bigger piece is really getting the identity right for these programs. So when they work with their ICAM service providers, their CSSPs, they actually come together for that production environment that you're going to see delivered to the warfighter. So I don't think programs should really feel like they need to do target level zero trust on their own, but really build that partnership with these other two groups. And right now, microsegmentation and user entity behavioral analytics is in my horizon, and that's what I'm focusing now.
Are the partnerships where you're merging the really long-term legacy establishments inside the department to these really brand new cutting-edge technologies, are those the most difficult ones to build?
I really ask the DIB for the difficulty in building those. It's where we ask our defense industrial-based partners to come in. Once we have identified we do have a gap and a capability, we can't reconfigure. This is something we're going to have to go to procurement and purchase, is to have, again, that partnership to work out the integration testing, use independent verification, validation, test engineers to build a prototype, to validate that not only have we met all the requirements, but the capability that's intended to be provided to that program is in fact there, and then invite in the Purple team to validate the overall quality of the implementation, then it's meeting the standards that we require to certify as target level zero trust.
What are the milestones that you want to hit between now and fiscal 2027 to know that you're staying on track to hit the department's deadline?
Yeah, so the milestones I'll be looking at is our zero trust metrics collection system to see the overall progress for programs that are implementing target level zero trust requirements, how many they've completed, how many they're inheriting either from Naval Identity Service, our ICAM solution, the ones they're inheriting from their cybersecurity service providers, and the ones that they're obligated to implement themselves, understanding that pace for all naval networks to meet target level zero trust by the end of FY 2027. So that metrics collection system is really looking at the gaps that they have and the pace in which they're closing those gaps towards meeting target. So there may be a possibility that a program may be at risk of not meeting target level zero trust by that deadline, but we're asking those programs that we do identify in the future, if they won't make target level zero trust, give us a POAM that will let us know what a realistic date that you will meet that target level that we're requiring all programs.
Are you exchanging information about hitting your deadlines with the other services to learn what they're doing, to share what you're doing?
Yes, so the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office has set up a readiness assessment tool for Zero Trust. It is basically the same thing. It's a checklist to look at the gap analysis and to report up to the DoD level at the rate that they're moving forward with target level Zero Trust.
What do you do to make sure that what you're doing is transparent to the end user that isn't involved with zero trust on a day-to-day basis and just needs to do whatever it is that their job consists of?
For the normal user, we asked them to do the familiarization course that was developed by DAU that's hosted on JKO. By doing that course, they have a better understanding of what zero trust is. And for the normal user, it will be very minimal impact. They're still going to be able to get onto the network, do the work that they need to do, and really not be interfered. They may actually see some improvements in performance by the way we design zero trust to preserve resources, both in cloud and on-prem, for their benefit.
Dave, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Aaron Faulkner is co-founder of Tycon. Thanks for joining me today. It's great to have you here. I am hearing a lot of folks at this show talking about quantum computing, first time.
Yes.
It really is something that's top of mind. What's over the horizon after quantum computing? What are people starting to think about as the next phase of security?
Yeah, we seem to be at a point where people are talking about quantum in two regards. One is what quantum computing is going to bring to everybody in terms of being able to factor new problems, address computational efforts in new ways. But quantum computing also brings a new threat. And that threat is to classical encryption, where quantum computers can break what we've been trusting for decades. So things like RSA 256, the standards that have been in place since essentially the dawn of information technology. And as quantum computing becomes more available, right, becomes more of a commodity capability, that means that attackers are going to be able to leverage those resources to get after and find secrets, the things that we've been working to protect our entire careers in cybersecurity.
Is that because of just the raw compute power of quantum computing, or are there other factors involved?
Yeah, in its most simplest form, that's exactly it, right? Just the raw horsepower that it brings to the table. And previously, quantum computers only available to a nation state or some type of national lab. But now they're being used in commercial practices. We're seeing them used in healthcare use cases, in financial use cases. And of course, bad actors are going to start to use quantum computers for cybersecurity use cases and finding ways to break that classical encryption. And so what, federal departments and agencies have had mandates now since 2022. There was the Quantum Computing Preparedness Act that was passed, so there's legislation. M2302 speaks to quantum readiness. There's been national security memorandums about this saying, hey, the federal government needs to establish a cryptographic inventory, understand what your most vulnerable ciphers are, and find ways to prioritize, and address your worst problems first, right? And so that's an area that we're working to help the federal government to efficiently determine what cryptography and encryption is in their enterprise. How can they start to migrate to quantum-resistant algorithms, which are now available? So NIST published quantum-resistant algorithms this past August and September, and those algorithms are finding their way into some of the commercial off-the-shelf capabilities, which is great. But as we know, in the federal government, there's a tremendous amount of legacy tech, and that legacy tech also that encryption needs to be upgraded to now quantum-resistant algorithms. And so we're focusing on that area to help our federal customers build that inventory faster.
Cyber practitioners have been trying to get ahead of the bad guys probably since there have been cyber practitioners. Is this an extension of that, or is this a different problem going in a different direction because of the nature of the horsepower, because of the nature of what needs to be protected, other factors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in some regards, it is a new vector because quantum computing just wasn't available to the bad guys. But on the other side of the coin, it's really not that much more different than the same CVEs or common vulnerabilities that have been out there for decades and being published. And so you can start to think about cryptography being as similar to a vulnerability that Microsoft might patch on or push out on Patch Tuesdays, right? That we are now going to start to look at the encryption and cryptography in our environments in the same way that we would look at any other common vulnerability and start to report on that. So if you think of things like the CISA CDM dashboard, if we're looking at a vulnerability for a piece of software, we should probably start inventorying and looking at a vulnerability for particular algorithms and encryption in the environment.
We have about a minute left. As the organizations, particularly in DoD, that we're focused on at this conference, start to think about things like security requirements for the defense industrial base and so on, are you seeing them thinking about the type of quantum challenges that we've discussed in this conversation?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, NIST has a National Cyber Center of Excellence around post-quantum cryptography. And we're proud to be one of the consortium collaborators, along with many other very capable companies and technologies in the space. They're working to establish standards around discovery and inventory workflows, as well as the great work that they've already done in establishing new standards towards those quantum resistant algorithms, right? And helping defense industry, the Department of Defense, the federal government kind of find their way to solving this problem, which is not 10 years from now. In the industry, we think it's a now problem. And certainly the government needs to establish what they have, understand what's that most at risk, and start to get to a more quantum resistant future.
Aaron, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you very much, Francis. My pleasure.
Jeff Hurley, Acting Director for IC4 at the Marine Corps. Welcome. Great to see you again. We talked on the panel at AFCEA DC a couple of weeks ago about how you're syncing up rationalization, system modernization, application rationalization, and modernization efforts in the Corps. Tell me where you are on that journey and where you're headed on that journey, Jeff.
So, good morning or good afternoon, by the way. We're well on that journey. Starting with McSen unification. So the Marine Corps network, we're trying to unify it from flagpole to fighting hole, as the way we term it. Modernizing the entire network so we have cyber visibility from all the way from our home bases all the way to the bitter end of the network. Our ability to see that from a cyber perspective is invaluable and can't be replaced. We do have some modernization issues, however, right? We're dealing with older technology, things that just need to be kind of blown up and rebuilt in a modern way with cyber built in from the ground up. And as we continue on our journey, we'll improve those along the way.
The things that you're blowing up and rebuilding, what are you doing in the meantime? Because I imagine those are systems that you need for operations in the interim.
So the answer to that question is different per system. Some systems we're going to absorb risk and say we can live without those for the period of time it takes us to rebuild those. Others we're building building them and keeping the old systems online until the new ones are ready. And then we make a seamless transition at that point. Where we can, though, we accept the risk. From a cost perspective, maintaining two systems is never a good idea. But from a risk perspective, from an effectiveness perspective, from a Marine Corps' capability perspective, sometimes that is necessary.
What are the components in the risk management framework that you're using to assess that?
So it's interesting you bring up RMF. I'm going to shift that question a little bit because RMF is changing. DoD CIO is dictated that we're going to blow up RMF. Now, what that exactly means, we're not entirely sure yet. From a Dawn perspective, Jane Rathbun is pushing cyber ready, which is something the Marine Corps is on board with as well, which essentially means we're going to take a system and we're going to look at its baseline. Once we understand its baseline and where it is from a cyber perspective, we can throw it out in the wild, provide some active monitoring on that, and if that baseline changes, we know there's a problem when we attack it. So I think that's probably a better answer than trying to go through which steps of the RMF we're looking at. RMF is way too rigid at this point. It's way too much checklist driven, and it is just not operational enough to be effective.
How do you get to a place where it is more dynamic then and not so static?
So time, the transition is going to take time. Everybody says we need to run fast. We do. We need to go run fast. But, slow is fast and fast is smooth. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So we just need to take our time, do it right, make sure that the things that we're implementing are valid and valuable and useful to the Corps.
One of the things that I took away from our conversation a couple of weeks ago on that panel, Jeff, is that the Corps is now on board with the idea that their modernization effort is not going to end, that it's something that will be a continuous iteration moving forward. How has that impacted the way that you're able to think, because other people are on board with that idea, about how you're going to proceed?
Well, it's opportunity. A lot of change going on in government right now, as you're intimately aware, and I look at that as absolutely opportunity. I've spent, in my 23 years active duty Navy time and a significant time as a civilian before taking this position, I've heard a lot of people gripe about how systems work and how bad things are. Well, guess what? We've now been given a carte blanche to go out and blow all that up and figure out exactly what we want to be when we grow up. How do we make those changes that we really believe need to happen? And the Marine Corps is going after those things, and we're making some of those changes, but we're not making them for tomorrow. We're making them for next year. We're trying to look far enough into the future that the changes we make won't have to be modernized again next week. And when they are modernized, they'll be simpler to modernize because they're built on a foundation that accepts that.
How much of what you have right now, how much of what you're working on is what you would call legacy, and how much of is what you would call modernized or okay for now?
Wow, that's a tricky question. I would say, from a tactical perspective, from those tactical systems, I think a lot of those are modernized. We're probably, 60-40. From a business system perspective, that's different, right? I think a lot of the business systems that the Marine Corps works with right now are legacy systems. And they are systems that have been built without cybersecurity built in from the ground up. So those are the ones I think we need to focus on. And I think we need to have things like ISSMs built into the planning process as these things are built, so that cybersecurity is built in from scratch. And they don't have to be bolted on as a secondary thought later on.
The security concept that everybody's talking about is zero trust here. And it strikes me that that is, I imagine, the focus in the core as well, that those two terms have become synonymous. Is that a fair read on my part?
I think that's fair read. I think, and zero trust is absolutely the baseline for everything we're doing from a security perspective. I will caveat that with, there's a pillar in zero trust called data. Data pillar, I am extremely concerned about with where we are as the DoD, as a government for that matter, because I don't think we have a baseline of how we label data, how metadata looks. And all of that is really integral on when you're trying to implement an AI solution or automate systems. Case in point, if I order a tank from the Army and I order a tank from the Navy, those are two entirely different items, right? So understanding and having a system that understands the difference between those things is very important.
Jeff, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, sir, very much.
Tom Kennedy's Vice President of Axonius. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining me. A lot of discussion here about cyber resilience. What are the steps, especially the first big step, that you see organizations taking to make sure they're resilient from a cyber perspective, Tom?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me, Francis. Always great to see you. So really, if you look at any cybersecurity framework, whether that's zero trust, that's very popular in the government space. In the commercial world, you have the CIS controls. They all start with asset management baseline, right? Have visibility into your systems. The White House actually did a really nice job of putting policy out over the last couple of years. Of course, it all started with Executive Order 14028, but one of the subsequent binding order directives, 2301, did a really nice job of emphasizing that as well. So it's pretty clear, like I think one of the biggest foundations is to get that asset framework down. We work with a lot of government agencies, Francis, and you can imagine the complexity when you think about one government agency we were talking with had 42 bureaus, individual bureaus and subgroups. So if you think about all the complexity that comes with the cybersecurity tools from each of those different individual units, the ability to stitch all that information together is super important.
Yeah. And once you have a map then of what you have, it strikes me that it's much easier to figure out then what the strategy is that you need to undertake to defend all of that.
Yeah, exactly right. And so you're taking it exactly the right way, right? We have a term in the industry, attack surface management. It's impossible to lock down your defenses if you don't understand what your attack surface is. So that's why it's so important.
Given the fluidity of the inventories, the fleets that these agencies have, how does one do that on an ongoing basis, and how often do you have to do it? How often do you need visibility into what you have today?
Yeah, so you're right. So that's the biggest, one of the biggest challenges is that the networks continue to get so complicated. And also you have different types of assets that you're trying to track. Think about cloud computing, IoT, all the IoT devices. So it really needs to be continuously done. I think that's been one of the challenges with some of the kind of legacy approaches is it's been manually done, right? Like, hey, I'll solve this in a point of time, but then it's very difficult to maintain. So using COTS solutions like Axonius, it can be ongoing, continuous monitoring and development of that asset baseline.
Yeah, you anticipated where I wanted to go next, which is what's the role in automation to help agencies figure out, keep their arms wrapped around it once they've got their arms wrapped around it.
Yeah, that's the area that we're like super excited about kind of in the future. So it's not just about visibility, right? Visibility is kind of like your table stakes now. It's really been able to put that data into action, right? And actionability. And so imagine like one of our most common use cases is identify my blind spots. So maybe give me all of the systems that are supposed to have a security agent on them, but don't for whatever reason. So we can identify that very easily. But the cool part is not only identify it, but then we can go back and work with the source tool to go put the right agent on the system. So that kind of automation is improving their overall defense posture for sure.
What are the things that organizations should do then? What's the second, third, fourth step? What are the long-term implications of continuing to stay resilient? Continuous monitoring, obviously, as you just alluded to, is one of them, but what else goes in that basket in your view, Tom?
Yeah, so we refer to it as comprehensiveness or completeness of your inventory. So you can always pull in more sources to be able to then correlate from as many sources as possible to get that full completeness. So that's what a lot of our customers are working on, is pulling in 20, 30, 40 sources to really get that comprehensive source of truth. And then the exciting thing is, once you have that source of truth, there are so many use cases, so many cyber hygiene use cases that you can execute off of that going forward, for sure.
Tom, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Francis.
Kelly Ahuja, the CEO of Versa, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
What are the gaps, what are the roadblocks that you're seeing organizations running into when they're working on the zero trust deadline that's coming up on fiscal year 2027 is not too far away?
Well, actually, it's really interesting because zero trust, everyone thinks it's a box that they can buy and just deploy it. It's not, it's a framework. However, most of the environments today are legacy, they're fragmented, and they don't really have a unified platform to kind of stitch them all together. So that's fundamentally what's missing in the current and frameworks today in the zero trust approaches. Most of the other vendors will come and sell you a component of a zero trust framework. Then you'll have 10 other vendors come and sell you another 10. In some of the cases that we've run into, our partners and customers have over 30 different standalone products that they've had to try to stitch together to really comply to the zero trust framework. Luckily for us, we have a software platform that we built everything from ground up that does networking, zero trust network access, security, firewall, as well as many other things, CASB, DLP, all the components that you would require of zero trust, all in a single software stack. And you can put that stack everywhere you want. You can put it in the cloud if you have a cloud node, you can put it on your prem in a WAN node, or you can put it on a LAN if you have a switch. Now what that does is your perimeter is consistently secured with the same policy. So the policy travels with me, not my device, but with me. So if I take my device from a remote access to an on-prem access, the policy follows me, the posture follows me, and my behavior follows me. So if I'm doing something that I'm not supposed to, or my device is, because it's a malicious attack that's happened already, the network will detect that there's something that's gone on. The zero trust principles and the policy will say, hey, we're going to quarantine you. And that happens automatically. The whole thing about zero trust is not about the components that you take, but it's how you bring them together and automate and make it more dynamic so that you can detect the threats in real time and remediate them as close as possible that you can at the edges where you're going to be.
The word that I want to, actually now two words there that I want to key in on. The first one is automation and the second one is edge computing, because one of the points of every conversation I have with everybody, civilian or military in the Defense Department, and I'm starting to see it now in the civilian agencies too, especially law enforcement.
It is increasing rapidly day by day.
Thinking about identity management in particular, but the zero trust concept, wherever that person is, wherever that person needs to access data or needs to send data to somebody else. And it strikes me that what you're talking about there is going to be maybe the key thing that either helps agencies get across the finish line in 2027 or prevents them from getting across.
And identity management is a critical area, right? Because you may come into one network where the identity management or Active Directory is done by one vendor, and you may go into a different one, it's a different one. So as a platform, you have to be able to work with different identity systems and be a broker, which is what we are, an identity broker. We can work with any identity manager, identity system, and bring that together into a unified policy for you, irrespective of which network, which access, which way you're coming into the network.
What are the questions that people at a conference like this should be asking, not just you, but anybody in there that they're talking to about their security postures that maybe they're not asking as often as they should?
You know, it's a great question, because what I find is everyone focuses on security posture from the access that they're in. Nobody looks at the security posture across all accesses. And that's where most of the gaps, the risks, and the adversaries kind of come in and exploit. because you've got a network posture if you're in the LAN, or if you've got a posture remote, if you're a remote user, you've got a posture there, or if you're in somewhere else in a corporate site, you've got a posture there. So it's in those gaps, if those are not built with a unified, consistent platform, but you're building them individually with bespoke stacks, that's where you get the gaps. And that's where the adversaries come in. So you've got to have a consistent posture, consistent policy enforcement, and a consistent framework across all those perimeters.
All right, 30 seconds left. How does somebody in the DoD measure whether they're on the right track, not just to hit deadlines, but to actually make their networks secure in a zero trust framework?
Well, I would say look at who's done it. DISA with Thunderdome has done it. I think they've got, you said Randy's coming tomorrow on the show. He's going to say that they've checked the boxes on all the 152 requirements for zero trust, which is great. And we're glad to be partnering with DISA on their approach on Thunderdome. So just look at what's been done, look at what's being deployed, and just repeat the same thing.
Kelly, it's great to have you here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Steve Pitcher of the Joint Staff, welcome. You're the Senior Cyber Survivability Analyst for the Joint Staff. What is the definition of cyber survivability?
Well, cyber survivability is both cybersecurity compliance, the requirements for it, and secure cyber resilience engineering, the other aspects of trying to put all of this stuff together. But the important aspect is that we are defining cyber in terms of performance. For years, we tried to do cost, schedule, performance, cost, schedule, performance, and security. Well, we failed miserably at that because the program managers never assessed on their ability to include that. So when in 2015, when we started this process, we looked to system survivability to implement cyber survivability, because we don't do cybersecurity for the sake of cybersecurity. We do it for the mission. And that's really been transformational, because now we get with our seniors early when they define their performance requirements for the function, for the capability itself, and ensure that they are considering cyber along with all of those other functional requirements.
How has that concept evolved over the last 10 years, and how do you expect to see that trajectory continue to grow?
What's really good is that even though we haven't had DODDs and DODIs that have explicitly stated you need to do cyber survivability, we're still a little bit too much focused on cybersecurity compliance or secure cyber resilient engineering and not orchestrating our efforts. But despite all of that, the services have seen resource and mission risk benefits in considering cyber survivability with all of their other functional requirements from day one, so that the analysis of alternatives and the request for proposals include cyber as part of those performance expectations. And so the services have done a great job. The Army's got their Army Cyber Acquisition Discipline guidance for any and all capabilities, IT capabilities. The Air Force has got their Secure Cyber Resilient Engineering guidance. The Navy is also doing all of those things as well, putting it into their program protection plans. And the Marines have really gotten behind it as well. So even without all of the DoD upper higher level guidance, they've been really moving out with it. And so it's really good to see how far we've gotten, even without all of that other to help with that.
What has driven that, since there isn't a DoD-wide push, since this is happening organically? What's driven it, and what do you think is necessary to continue to drive this as the threat landscape changes, as technology changes, and so on?
Well, the goodness is that even though it only applies to systems going through the JSIDs, the joint requirements process, it's had enough high-level visibility there for those large acquisitions that they've been able to see those resource and mission risk benefits and considering them for all acquisition pathways. Even though it only applies to major capability acquisitions today, it's required for those. The resource and mission risk benefits are there if they consider cyber survivability. And lately I've been trying to say, you don't even have to think about it in terms of some transformational cyber survivability perspective. It's still defining those cybersecurity and cyber resilience performance requirements that we should all be doing anyway. You don't even have to think you don't have to release the ledge of cybersecurity and reach for cyber survivability. It's just, how can we better define our performance requirements so they are part of cost, schedule, and performance risk trade space decisions throughout life cycle.
Excuse me, what would you like to see the agents or the departments continue to do, the services continue to do to stay on the right path, Steve?
I think the services are on the right path. They're just very large, and so we still got niches where they have not seen the benefits yet. But I really would like to see that we start better coordinating our DoD guidance. Making sure that the young people, not me, I've been here for 42 years, but even those, we need the younger people who can say, God, if only we could do the following. And they're going to come up with a lot of stuff that's not going to make sense, or stuff that we thought of 20 or 30 years ago, but and we didn't do it because of some reason. But today, maybe those things make sense. So we've got to actively fight for inputs from the people who are actually doing the jobs today, get their inputs, and at the 06 GS15 level, come out and look at all of that and say, okay, some of this makes sense. We really got to do this. This one here, if we tweak it a little bit, we could really be transformational. And too often we jump right to general officer coordination because it is just so important that we implement some capability. And too often it's almost irrelevant because we didn't do up front what we needed to with the action officers. And then, so we need to do the storming, the norming, and the performing. And right now we're just rushing to performing, and we can't perform any better if we don't do a better job of upfront. What should we really be doing to transform the way we do business?
Steve, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining me. Mac Gupta, Senior Director for Marketing at Rocket Software. Welcome. It's great to have you here. How are you seeing agencies thinking about artificial intelligence as it applies to their cyber operations? How are they combining those two concepts together?
That is a hot topic nowadays, Francis, for sure. To me, AI is more like a co-pilot, not an autopilot. AI can ingest large amounts of data, spot patterns, explain what's going on, maybe speed up responses, but it does come down to people having those insights and making those smart decisions. So I think agencies are pretty bought into the fact that AI is supporting their cybersecurity efforts rather than taking over.
A lot of the discussion here about cyber regards resilience and readiness and recovery. How are you seeing organizations thinking about cyber resilience, especially in the context of having AI tools now to help them automate the way that they're monitoring systems and so on?
I think in that context, I always want to talk about blind spots. So when you talk about blind spots, what we are basically saying is, what is it that agencies are not thinking about is probably where some of the hackers and attackers are going. And one spot for that is their core mission critical systems, such as the mainframe. Agencies assume that access controls are enough, but that's not really true. In today's world, you have to assume that there are actors inside the system already in your network. So you have to protect your crown jewels, so to speak. And multi-factor authentication is a good example of how you do that.
The zero trust effort that we're hearing a lot about here, that the Defense Department has been moving on for a couple of years now, have a couple more years to hit deadlines. What's your sense of what it will take for them and the progress that they've made so far as getting them to the end state that they want to reach?
For zero trust, let me start with level setting a little bit because there is a lot of confusion out there. Zero trust is not about denying access per se. It's more about figuring out who can have access to what, when, where, and how. So it's about smarter trust decisions. So federal agencies are typically pretty confused about what path they should take, where they should start, or where they should focus their efforts. And so my recommendation would be essentially start with simple MFA, single sign-on. Make sure you're not building a maze, but you're creating smart walls around your data and applications and infrastructure, and making sure that you then build from there once you have experience doing that.
Yeah, you mentioned the confusion that exists around zero trust and the conceptual, I guess, perceptions that people have of it. What do you think's generated that? And the reason I ask is because it's helpful then to understand what has to happen to maybe remove that confusion.
I think some of it is just the term zero trust, and that seems to imply that you trust no one and verify, which is a good way to go. I think the part of the confusion is, why is it needed? Agencies seem to believe that access control that they have in place, or highly secure enterprise systems like mainframe, so it does seem like a new policy that they have to check off, but that's not really the case. I think it's important to understand the intent behind the letter of the law, so to speak, the policy, and then follow those guidelines in a way that it makes sense to your environment. One of the things, for example, the zero trust enables is the fact that if you have an actor already in the system, you want to make sure you segment your systems. So once they're in, they're not just freely roaming around. So that's the kind of thing that makes zero trust compliance systems a lot stronger than they would have otherwise been.
We just have less than a minute left. You mentioned blind spots earlier. What are the best ways that you've seen to close those blind spots?
Very quickly, doing regular automated deep scans. We call them integrity vulnerabilities that you want to make sure that hackers are not exposed to, because they can cause a lot of damage without the alarm bells go off.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me, Mac.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Francis.
Mac Gupta of Rocket Software. Thanks for joining me for this Innovation in Government program presented by Carahsoft from TechNet Cyber 2025. If you missed any part of this program, you can watch the show in its entirety on our website at fedgovtoday.com or the FedGov Today YouTube channel. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for watching. Good night.